The too-fat bride was sent to the wrong ranch as a cruel joke, but the little girl called her mother. The buckboard wagon groaned under the strain of the muddy ruts, a sound that echoed the ache in Annalise's bones. Each jolt was a fresh reminder of her humiliation, a cruel joke played out over 100 desolate miles. The letter had promised a new life, a prosperous ranch, a husband who sought a partner. Instead, the driver had deposited her here, at the foot of a stark, windswept homestead that seemed to be actively surrendering to the encroaching winter. The Blackwood Ranch. It was the wrong place, a place of shadows and silence, ruled by a man whose eyes held the same barren cold as the landscape around him. Caleb Blackwood had not sent for a bride. He looked at her not with welcome, but with a weary confusion, his face a mask of grief worn so long it had become his only expression. Annalise clutched her worn valise, the sting of rejection welling in her throat, ready to turn back to the nothing she had come from. But then, a small hand, impossibly gentle, slipped into hers. A little girl with eyes as haunted as her father's, her face smudged with soot and sorrow, peeked out from behind the man's legs. She clung to the worn fabric of Annalise's skirt, a tiny anchor in a sea of despair. The child looked up, her gaze direct and profoundly serious, and a voice, small and fragile as a bird's wing, whispered the words that would change everything. God finally sent you to us. A blizzard descended that night, a furious white wall that cut the Blackwood Ranch off from the rest of the world, sealing the three of them inside the small, cold cabin. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, rattling the window panes and forcing snow through the cracks in the doorframe. Caleb worked in silence, his movements economical and grim as he secured the barn and tended the livestock. He was a ghost in his own home, his grief a tangible presence that chilled the air more than the storm itself. Annalise, caught in a limbo of circumstance, found her purpose in small acts of defiance against the cold and the sorrow. She stoked the fire until it roared with life, its warmth pushing back against the cabin's gloom. She found meager provisions in the pantry and cooked a thick, savory stew, the smell of it a small, forgotten comfort in the desolate space. Her eyes kept drifting to a portrait on the mantel, covered in a fine layer of dust. It was of a beautiful, smiling woman, her eyes full of a light that was now painfully absent. This was the source of the haunting, the heart of the ranch's sorrow. By the fire, the little girl, Lily, sat on the floor, a piece of charcoal in her hand, scratching images onto a piece of smoothed wood. They were pictures of jagged lines and swirling darkness, the storm outside rendered in the stark, chaotic language of a child's trauma. Annalise watched her, her heart aching with a fierce, protective instinct. She was a woman who had been told her whole life that she was too much, too large, too plain, too quiet, and yet, in this broken place, she felt a strange and unsettling sense of belonging, a quiet determination to shield this small, silent child from the storm, both within the cabin and inside the little girl's own heart. Days bled into a week, each one a slow, deliberate study in quiet observation. The blizzard raged on, a relentless siege that forced an intimacy the cabin's occupants were not prepared for. Caleb watched Annalise from under the shadow of his brow, his initial suspicion warring with a grudging respect. He saw the way she moved, with a gentle competence that was slowly, methodically, reclaiming the house from its grief. She scrubbed the floors, mended Lily's worn dress, and even cleaned the glass on the dusty portrait, revealing the vibrant life in his late wife's face. One evening, as she hummed a soft, forgotten tune while kneading dough, Lily climbed into her lap, a rare and startling act of trust. The child leaned her head against Annalise's chest and fell asleep, a deep, peaceful sleep that Caleb hadn't seen in over a year. The sight stirred something deep within him, a painful thawing around his frozen heart. He finally spoke, his voice rough from disuse. Her name was Amelia. My wife. Annalise simply nodded, her hand stroking Lily's hair. She fell, he continued, the words tasting like ash. During a storm, out by the ravine. I don't remember it all. The doctor said the blow to my head stole the memory. Annalise felt a wave of compassion for this broken man. She understood wounds that didn't show. Gathering her courage, she met his gaze and spoke her own quiet truth. The man I was meant to marry sent a letter back with the driver. He said he had no use for a bride, built for winter. The cruel words hung in the air, but here, in this small cabin, they lost some of their sting. It was a confession, an offering of her own brokenness, and in that shared vulnerability, the first, fragile thread of connection was woven between them. The mystery of Amelia's death lingered in the cabin like a low-hanging smoke, a story with missing pages. Lily's drawings began to change. The chaotic scribbles of the storm gave way to more distinct figures. One afternoon, she brought Annalise a piece of wood, her small face tight with concentration. On it, she had drawn two figures. One was a woman, lying on the ground near a jagged line that was clearly the ravine. The other was a tall man, but it wasn't the broad-shouldered silhouette of her father. This man was leaner, and his face, though crudely drawn, was fixed in a menacing grin. Annalise felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. She showed it to Caleb, who stared at it for a long moment before shaking his head, his expression shuddering. "It's a nightmare, is all." The storm frightens her, but Annalise saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the seed of a terrible doubt being planted in the fallow ground of his forgotten memories. Later, while searching for extra blankets in a large cedar chest at the foot of Caleb's bed, her fingers brushed against a bundle of faded calico. She pulled it out. It was a dress, Amelia's dress, the one from the portrait. It was torn at the sleeve and horribly stained with mud. And near the hem, almost hidden in the folds, was a dark, reddish-brown stain that was certainly not from the earth. The dress felt like a scream trapped in fabric, a silent testament to a truth that refused to stay buried. Holding it, Annalise knew with a chilling certainty that Amelia Blackwood had not simply fallen. As if on cue with the shifting emotional landscape inside the cabin, the great blizzard finally broke. A pale, watery sun pierced through the clouds, casting long blue shadows across a world draped in pristine white. The thaw began, slow and hesitant at first, then with a steady drip-drip-drip from the eaves that sounded like a clock ticking towards a new future. The change in weather mirrored the change in Caleb. The silence that had once been a wall around him began to crumble into quiet conversation. He told Annalise about the plans he'd had for the ranch, the dreams he and Amelia had shared, the words coming in fragmented pieces as if he were relearning a long-forgotten language. One afternoon, he took her out to the paddock to repair a fence rail that had broken under the weight of the snow. He showed her how to hold the hammer, his large, calloused hand covering hers for a moment, sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. The small, accidental touch was more intimate than any conversation. They worked in comfortable silence, the shared task a simple bridge between them. That evening, as Annalise read a story to Lily by the fire, the little girl pointed to the drawing of the menacing man, which Annalise had kept on the mantel. Lily looked up at her, her eyes wide and clear, and spoke her second complete sentence since Annalise had arrived. "Bad man," she whispered, her small voice filled with an old, chilling fear. The words hung in the air, a definitive pronouncement, and Caleb, who stood in the shadows by the door, heard them. The denial in his heart finally cracked, leaving only a cold, terrifying dread. The sound of hoofbeats a few days later was an intrusion, a harsh note in the quiet harmony the small family had found. A man on a fine, dark stallion rode into the yard, dismounting with an air of arrogant ownership. He was handsome, well-dressed, and his smile was a polished veneer that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. It was the man from Lily's drawing. Annalise's blood ran cold. The man tipped his hat. "Marcus Thorne," he announced, his gaze sweeping over the homestead with disdain before landing on Annalise. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I trust my little joke wasn't too inconvenient," he smirked, looking Annalise up and down. "Though I suppose a winter bride feels right at home in a place like this. My apologies for the delay." The storm, you understand, he was the man she was supposed to marry, the man who had discarded her with a cruel note. He reached for her arm, his charm dissolving into a possessive command. "Come now. Pack your things. I've come to collect you." But before his fingers could touch her, Caleb moved, stepping between them with a quiet finality that was more intimidating than any shout. He was no longer the hollowed-out man she had first met, he was a protector, a guardian standing his ground. "She's not going anywhere," Caleb said, his voice low and steady as the earth beneath their feet. Marcus Thorne's eyes narrowed into slits of fury. "You choose this ruin, over my proposition," he sneered at Annalise. Caleb's gaze didn't waver. She's home. It was a simple declaration, but it was a vow, a truth he hadn't even known he possessed until that very moment. The choice had been made. That night, the sky turned a bruised purple and another storm rolled in, this one angrier and more violent than the last. It was under the cover of this tempest, with the wind tearing at the roof and rain lashing against the windows, that Marcus Thorne returned. He didn't ride into the yard this time. He emerged from the darkness like a wraith, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He kicked the door open, the wood splintering, and stood there, drenched and demonic. "You will not have what is mine," he bellowed, his eyes locked on Caleb. She was mine. Just like Amelia was supposed to be. The name hung in the air, thick with poison. And then the truth, ugly and brutal, spilled from him in a torrent of taunts. "She never wanted you, you broken-down farmer. She loved me. But she was weak, too loyal to leave you. I met her at the ravine that day to convince her. When she refused me, when she laughed at me, I had to make her stop." He smiled, a terrible, predatory expression. "She fell so beautifully. And then you came running. It was so easy to put you down, to let the storm and the fall scramble your memory. Sending your new bride here," he gestured wildly at Annalise, "was the punchline. The town's cast off for the rancher who lost his mind. A broken man deserves a broken bride." As he spoke, the dam in Caleb's mind shattered. The memories flooded back in a sickening rush, Amelia's terrified face, Marcus's snarling rage, the sickening crunch of the push, the blinding pain as a rock struck his own head. It was all there. The grief was no longer a dull ache, it was a white-hot, cleansing fire. The cabin became a whirlwind of violence. Caleb lunged at Marcus, a roar of pure, animalistic grief tearing from his throat. The two men crashed into the table, sending plates and cutlery scattering across the floor. They were a tangle of limbs and fury, their struggle a primal dance of vengeance and desperation in the flickering firelight. Lily screamed, a raw, piercing sound of terror unleashed. Annalise reacted on pure instinct. She was not a damsel to be saved, she was a mother protecting her child, a wife protecting her home. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth, its weight solid and sure in her hands. Marcus gained the upper hand, his fists raining down on Caleb, his face contorted with hate. "I'll finish what I started," he shrieked over the howl of the wind. As he raised a piece of splintered wood to bring it down on Caleb's head, Annalise moved. With a strength born of love and desperation, she swung the iron poker, striking Marcus hard across his back. He howled in pain and surprise, staggering away from Caleb. The momentary reprieve was all Caleb needed. He surged to his feet, his face a mask of grim purpose, and with one final, decisive blow, he sent Marcus crashing to the floor, unconscious. The fight was over. Silence descended upon the cabin, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and the drumming of the rain. And then, as if the world itself were exhaling, the storm outside broke, the wind died down, and the relentless rain softened to a gentle patter. In the clean, quiet aftermath, the world felt new. The rising sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the wreckage of the night's battle. The authorities came from town, their faces grim as they hauled away a bound and snarling Marcus Thorne. Justice, it seemed, had finally found its way to the Blackwood ranch. When they were gone, an immense quiet settled over the three of them. Caleb, his face bruised but his eyes clear for the first time, sank into a chair. The return of his memory was a terrible burden, but it was also a release. He could finally mourn Amelia, not as a hazy phantom of guilt, but as the woman he had loved and lost. He looked at Annalise, who was gently cleaning a cut on his forehead. He saw not the winter bride or the town's cast off, but the woman who had faced down the storm with him, the woman who had pieced his broken family back together with quiet strength and boundless compassion. He reached out and took her hand. "He was wrong," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were never broken. You were the only thing strong enough to make us whole again." He pulled a small, simple gold band from his pocket. It was Amelia's. "This isn't to replace her," he said, his gaze steady and full of a new, profound love. "It's to start over. With you." If you'll have a Annalise's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of joy, of belonging. She nodded, unable to speak, as he slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. 1 year later, the world was alive with the vibrant green of spring. The Blackwood ranch was no longer a place of shadows, but one of light and life. The fields were plowed, new fences stood strong against the horizon, and the laughter of a child was a constant, joyful melody. Annalise, no longer a mail-order bride but a beloved wife and mother, stood on the porch, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. They watched as Lily, her hair now long and bright in the sun, chased butterflies in a field of wildflowers, her voice carrying on the breeze as she chattered away to herself, a happy, carefree child reborn. The scars of their past remained, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were reminders of the storm they had weathered together, of the family that had been forged in the harshest of winters. They had found each other not by plan or design, but by a cruel joke of fate that had turned into the greatest blessing of their lives. And you see, that's how love often works. It doesn't always arrive in the package we expect. Sometimes, it's delivered to the wrong address, a twist of fate that turns out to be the rightest thing in the world. They were 3 broken souls, a man who couldn't remember, a woman who felt unworthy, and a child who couldn't speak. But together, they found their voices, they healed their wounds, and they built a family, not from blood, but from choice. They chose each other. Because the most beautiful families are often the ones we find along the way, the ones we build with love, courage, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves a place to finally call home. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a tale of hope and resilience.